So you're all very welcome this evening to this environmental farming scheme information evening and virtual farm tour of Portloughan Farm. My name is Nicola Warden and I'm a biodiversity technologist at CAFRE. The biodiversity team have a role in developing EFS online training and delivering EFS training events. Through my work, I've been involved in implementing different EFS options on the CAFRE lowland farms, such as agroforestry and hedgerow planting, where I get students involved in this work. Our speaker tonight will be David Sanford. David owns and manages Portloughan Farm, which is situated on the southern shores of Strangford Lough. So thank you to David for speaking tonight. David is also one of CAFRE's technology demonstration farmers. So our technology demonstration farms demonstrate innovative technologies. So these farms allow other farmers to come and see different technologies being demonstrated, and it allows farmers to hear the experience of the host farmer and have the opportunity to ask questions about adopting them. David is within the farm habitat creation and management category, and tonight we'll focus on the options David has established through EFS. Rosemary Quinn has also kindly joined us for the evening for the question and answer session. Rosemary works in Countryside Management Branch and has a great knowledge of working within EFS. This event this evening aims to provide you with some general information about EFS, and I will be given some pictures of the options which are currently available, and then we will hand over to David to give us the virtual farm tour of his farm and the work that he is doing. As I said, please continue to submit questions. If you have any questions, if you can find the Q&A icon or the question mark icon, please do so, and we will answer these at the end. If, however, you have a very specific question for your farm, you can email this in to efs@dara-ni.gov.uk. We will give you that email address at the end of the presentation. So that is just if you have any very specific questions that would need looking into. You can ask your questions that way. So David, if you want to just go to the next slide for me, please. So our scheme aims, the EFS aims to restore, preserve and enhance biodiversity, improve water quality, reduce soil erosion and improve soil management, foster carbon sequestration, reduce greenhouse gas and ammonia emissions and link up existing habitats. So all of the options will link into some of these aims, and then you'll be able to get these aims. Will hopefully then they will start working then on your farm through the different options. Thanks David, next one. So the Environmental Farming Scheme wider level tranche 6 is now open for application and it closes this Friday. So just with the timing of this meeting, it is a bit of urgency. If you're wanting to make an application, they have to be in by this Friday. That is the website address there, or if you type in to a search engine DARA EFS, the homepage then that is there on the right, that will appear for you. And on that you'll be able to find all of the different options and information about the different options. Thanks David. So this slide here shows you on the left, that is basically the options that are available and the payment rates. They're all listed there. And again, as I was saying, you can go onto the website and see them in more detail. Each of the options then come with an information sheet. So the information sheets are very important. They contain all the information that will help you to be successful in completing the option. So it gives you dates, the specific measurements. If, for example, you're doing fencing, the specifics around the fencing that has to be used, posts, etc. The dates for implementing some of the options are all listed on those information sheets. So advisable to go on, have a read at them now before you make the application, so you know what you're signing up for. And just be aware of the work that needs completed and when it needs completed. There are also videos that you can watch prior to applying, but you will have to watch some of these again whenever you, as part of your agreement, your online training. But please note some of these videos may not be fully up to date yet for Tranche 6, so some details will be getting corrected in these videos for your online training come January. Next slide, please, David. So I'm just going to run through some pictures of different options that are available and what the outcome is, so rather than reading on paper, just to give you some pictures. So starting with our field boundary options, top left there is our dry stone walls. So that is the rebuilding of a single skin or a double skin stone wall. So if a portion has fallen down, this scheme can help to rebuild it then. The top right then is the creation of a riparian buffer. So this is where a fence is erected either 2 meters or 10 meters from the watercourse bank. The area then between the fence and the watercourse is left ungrazed, so livestock is excluded. And then there are other options to plant that with trees or without trees. So different options for the creation of a riparian buffer. And then bottom left is the planting of a new hedgerow with 2 protective fences. Thanks, David. Then our tree planting options. So top left there is planting a native tree corridor. We also have the natural regeneration of a native woodland. Bottom left is the establishment of agroforestry. And then on our right is a creation of a traditional orchard. So all the details, as I was saying, about what you need to do and how you need to do it really is within those information sheets on the DAERA website. Thanks, David. And then our arable or field margin options. So top left is the creation of the pollinator margin, so annual wildflowers. Bottom left is our winter feed crop for wild birds. And then the retention of winter stubble is on the right. And David will talk about some more of these this evening. So this is just a selection of photos of the different options available in Tranche 6. Alongside these options, there are then the non-productive investments or NPIs. So for example, a gate and a gate post or a water truck. So these items are available as add-ons to some of the options. But in the information sheets for each of the options, you will see it'll be outlined what non-productive investments are available for that option and what you can add on now to your application. So it requires a bit of thought just into what you want to put onto your application now by Friday. So I'm now just going to hand over to David to talk us through his farm. And please remember to submit your questions throughout. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicola, very much indeed. That's a good outline of, I think, it's an excellent scheme, I have to say. I think the EFS wider is a very broad embracing scheme. There's something there for everybody. It's now in its, I think it's 5th year now from memory, 4th year, 5th year now. So I suppose some of the option payments are still okay, and some, of course, with costs having overtaken us a bit, probably a little bit could do with an uplift now. But I think all I would say to people thinking about joining the scheme is there isn't a better time to do it now. We don't know how long the EFS wider scheme is going to be available for, whether it will be launched again or not. To me, it's a good all-embracing scheme, well worthwhile involving with. And then I think it would be very easy to build on it for the future as well. Just let's comment on Portloughan. I don't want to be seen to sort of teaching my grandma to suck eggs. You know what I mean? I'm learning every single day that I've started the farm again, and I think from these, and certainly from my technology demonstration farm visits, the physical visits that I've had, I think I've learned probably more from the people who have been to my farm than probably the farmers who came to visit my farm. But anyway, I think in the sort of conversation you have, and you learn the whole time, and anybody who doesn't learn something every day really is probably not being honest with himself. So I'm going to give you a sort of tour of the farm, a little bit about the history of the farm, and sort of where it all sort of started. My father bought the farm in 1960, and there were no farm support payments or anything in those days. The EU had been heard about, but we weren't involved in the EU. And I think there were various sort of local support packages, but nothing for the environment, put it like that. So my father had to get stuck in very, very quickly indeed. He put all the money he ever had into the place, and they had to pay back. So he decided to go in for pigs in those days, so quite a reasonable thing to do. We had 80 breeding sows. We fattened for 6 weeks and then sold on for finishing. We had 100 acres of spring crops, and we had 3,000 turkeys at the Christmas market. We bought day-old chicks, and we had 300 done as oven ready. And you can imagine that the week before Christmas in the Sanford household, it was trying to get 300 oven ready, big turkeys ready for restaurants and golf clubs and people. It was all pretty hectic. He retired in 1988, and we then let it in Conacre until 2014. And I probably don't want to tell you this, but my father probably, like me, probably wasn't a very good farmer, but he said he never made any farm money out of farming until the day he let the place. So whether that's fair or not, I just don't know. I started off my life wanting to farm, my business life, and when I left school, I went to Greenmount for a couple of years, did the Advanced National Certificate of Agriculture. It was new in those days. Left full of good ideas and wanting to spend lots of money on the farm. And I very quickly realized that lots of young farmers before me, that there really wasn't room for me and my father on the farm. So I had been a little involved in car rallying, and I went off to get a career in the motor trade. And I retired about 8 years ago, and decided, with the agreement of the person who was farming the land, that we should take it back in hand, which is what I did. So what I learned about farming was about 45 years old, and I very quickly had to learn a bit about it. So the current farm profile is 70 hectares, 30 hectares of arable, which is all in spring barley for reasons of EFS, I suppose, more than anything else. And we have 40 hectares of woodland habitat. So the arable area has shrunk, not irrevocably. Some of it has irrevocably because we planted quite a few trees. But a lot of that, we have a lot of the edges, every single one of the fields, bar a couple of small fields, we have 6 metre rough grass margins, which of course, well, not of course, but just having had a cross compliance check, those 6 metre margins are quite handy to making sure that you don't fall foul of drift into waterways and that sort of thing. So that's the current footprint of the farm. The farm layout, you see my mouse or not, but this is the farm yard, and the house right in the middle is quite nice being in the middle. And I don't know, some of you will know the Alderstown Road. This is Castle Ward in here, and this is Strangford Lough, which is a Ramsar AONNB, so it's a very important site. So you can probably just see my rough grass margin stretch the whole way down the shore, giving a bit of a buffer from nutrients, runoff and everything else. So that's the farm layout. And of the habitats, we have 40 hectares of habitats, of which 8 are active under environmental farming schemes. I have one field in the higher scheme because it borders, or doesn't border, they all border on Strangford, but one floods apparently in some obscure high tide map. And so that's in the higher scheme. The rest of the farm is in the wider scheme. So we have 8 hectares in the EFS. We have 4 hectares of grass and rough areas, which aren't in the EFS, but they're good habitats. And we have 3 hectares of ponds and bogs, 8 hectares of old established woodlands, which are probably rough scrub, but also some were planted about 150 years ago as well. But it's not very much, 8 hectares in a 80 hectare farm, not that much. We have 16 hectares of grant-aided woodlands, which were planted using various previous woodland planting schemes, and I'll show you a map of that in a second. And we have 2 hectares of Christmas trees, which is a new venture I started about 4 or 5 years ago, and the jury is very much firmly out on that, whether that's worthwhile or not, but I enjoy growing trees, so it's something I wanted to do. Previous agro-environmental schemes, I was in the countryside management scheme in 2010, and it was a good scheme as well. It wasn't as all-embracing as the EFS scheme is. The one thing I did in that, which I can't do now, I think, is I restored quite a few of the old stone pillars and got the gates, which, well, luckily are still around the farm and around the farmyard. I got them restored, so we managed to put those back in places we didn't need huge gaps. Then I went into the NI Countryside Management Scheme, which, of course, well, most of you would probably know who are in it, with a whole farm payment as well as a habitat payment. So it was a very good scheme. And that was 2010, 2018. And I planted some new hedgerows, but also it did, I had, I think at one time, about 15 acres of wild bird cover, rough grass margins, etc., etc. The woodland scheme, as I said, the farm woodland scheme and a farm woodland premium scheme, 1997 to 08, and I planted in those schemes about 18,000 trees, and they were very predominantly broadleaves, although there were some conifers put in to sort of beat them up, so to speak, in other words, to make some warmer areas within the wood, which is good habitat for certain species of birds and wildlife. On the EFS itself, I say the wider and higher, I have 8 hectares under agreement, which is 20%. I have arable margins, which are 6 metre width, rough grass margins, which I think is an exceptionally worthwhile habitat to have. It gives you, as I said, a spray buffer, a nutrient buffer, but also it's probably, well, it's not probably, it is using less productive, sometimes shaded, sometimes rocky areas which aren't very productive. And I also use them for straightening up field edges, because the margins don't have to be 6 metres the whole way around the field. You can have it at 2 metres at one end and 15 metres at the other end, or whatever, 12 metres at the other end. It's the average of 6 metres around the whole field. And this is a fairly new habitat, the cultivated uncropped arable margins. And I'll show you a few pictures of that in a second. But they're 6 metres as well. I have some of those, but not that many, because under the wider scheme, if you've been applying, you probably understand as well as I do the financial capping of the wider scheme. So I couldn't do as much as I wanted to do, but I did a bit more, which I paid for myself, but it's all I can afford to do. We have 2 hectares of lapping fallow plot, and we retain, off the top of my head, about 7 or 8 hectares of winter stubble, but in fact I don't plough anywhere on the farm until the middle of February anyway. I have some wild bird cover, which you can see to the right, and that is, the prescription for that picture is actually the old NICMS 2-year wild bird cover. As I'm funding it myself because of the wider scheme capping, it doesn't have to be a serial based. So I put this in 2 or 3 years ago, a couple of years ago now, and one of the issues with the protocol, as we know, is of course getting these wild bird mixtures over from the mainland has been difficult. So this was actually planted 2 years ago, and it was very much a sort of leftover seed from previous seeding. But you can see the different sorts of species within that. That's quinoa or quinoa, if you're modern, you call it that. I call it quinoa. Some linseed is in there. There's phacelia, and there's, I think there's fodder radish in that, and a little bit of kale as well. You can see, and that in the winter months when all these wild bird covers, whether it's a 1-year subscription or a 2-year, when you walk into that in January or February, it just takes off with small birds. It's the most rewarding crop to have on your farm. I think you'll find, even if you're not a birder or that keen on wildlife, if you see lots of wildlife using your farm, it does make you feel good. As if you don't believe me, try it. I would argue anyone who doesn't get a feel good factor out of seeing wildlife use your farm. So field margins, arable margins again, and the reason for these margins are so many-fold really. But this is a picture taken with a drone from one of my fields. This isn't really a proper hedge. It's what I would call a good traditional sort of bank really. It's got a bit of hedging. It's got a bit of briar, but it's got, you can see there, it's got a 6-meter margin just there, and then this is a wild bird cover crop, when then joins onto the arable crop. And on the other side, it's got, and I'll show you pictures of that in the next couple of slides, the cultivated arable margin. But what you're trying to do is to have a gravitation down from the hedge down to your crop. And if I was being critical of this, is because if you think about this in summertime, when this crop is growing, it's lush and heavy, and this wild bird cover is doing well, it's thick and it's heavy too. You've got your grass margin, which is probably also thick, and if it's wet, it's wet. And there's probably no open space in this, which is probably, from the wildlife perspective, a little bit of a mistake. So I'll show you a couple of pictures of the cultivated arable margin. That's where that really does come in very well. This is the cultivated margin being made, and basically all you have to do with it is that when you've ploughed your field, if you do plough, and some of you might not plough, I still do, but I'll talk about that later on, trying to move away from the plough as much as I can, being sensible about it though. So I've got my 6 metre rough grass margin here, and then this is the 6 metre cultivated arable margin under construction, and all you do with that is you power harrow it. But it has to be ploughed before you power harrow it. So you power harrow it and you leave it. You're not allowed to spray it. You're not allowed to put fertilizers on it. And over a period of 4 months or whatever in the growing season, you can see in this picture beside, you can see what happens. Now, some of you who farm and farmed a lot longer than I have will look at this and think, gosh, I haven't sat here at 7:30 on a nice summer's evening to be told how to farm weeds. I think we just need to take a step back from that. I mean, weeds are part of biodiversity, and okay, you don't want toxic weeds, you don't want weeds that encroach in the food growing cropping area, but these areas can be exceptionally beneficial to wildlife. And you can see some corn marigolds, which if you ever drive a combine, you don't want too many corn marigolds in your field because it sticks the cutter bar. But on their own, they're a great pollinator plant, and you can see some thistles that have gone over, and I can grow very good thistles, believe me, down at Portloughan. But the great thing about this crop is it's got some open space in it as well. This is a little bit of chickweed and stuff there, so it's open. If it's wet, chicks, skylark chicks, partridge chicks, if I had them here, can get in there and dry off. And then this is your 6 metre rough grass margin coming into your hedge there. So you can see the delineation mark there. So that hopefully explains the margins, and just on rough grass margins, though, just probably it's fair to say they need a little bit of management as well. From memory, when you first put them in, there's a prescription for the seed, which I won't go into now, but it's got some grass seeds like Coxwood, Timothy, and some fescues and things like that. It's clearly marked on the EFS website what the mix has to be, and make sure you keep the copy of what you buy. If you're audited, then you'll be able to prove you put in the right mix. And I think from memory, you have to cut it once in your first year, and then I think you're allowed to cut it once every 3 years. My advice to you would be, I have a flail tractor, flail mower, and when you're cutting it after it's been growing for a while, it's very easy to undo a lot of the good you've done by trying to be too neat and tidy. Keep the mower up. Don't let the flails dig into. You've got big clumps of coxwood here, which is really, really useful habitat. And also you've got lots of bugs and beasties living in these grass margins. And there again, the one thing that a lot of research has been done across the water is, in these rough grass margin, the area of crop beside the rough grass margin, because there are far more aphids aphid predators in the rough grass margin, it tends to keep the aphid count down in your margin, in your arable bit beside the margin. I'm not explaining that very well, but I think you understand what I mean. This is a harbour for things that eat the crop aphids, which we don't want too many of. So it's got lots and lots and lots of benefits, and of course it locks carbon, doesn't release carbon, because we know bare soil up to a point releases carbon. So I think if it was my farming world, I'd be telling everybody, if you're an arable farmer, if financially you can do it in the limits of the EFS wider, I would be trying to recommend you to have every single arable field should a rough grass margin. But the point about managing as well, I've got to say to you, is keep the flail mower up, but you do have to manage them a bit, because after a while you'll get brambles and thorn encroaching into this as well. But if you want to take them out in the future, they're dead easy to take out. You can burn them off, rotivate them, plough them up again, and then seed them in with the rest of the ground. So it's no big deal, put it like that, to get rid of them again. Hedgerows and banks. I have a reasonable number of hedgerows. I've resurrected some of them. I've replanted some, and they're a huge benefit to wildlife, as we know, and of course to sequestering carbon. So there's a lot of work being done on how to measure your hedgerow carbon sequestration, and I think we'll start getting some good scientifically proven formulas so you can work out what's the optimum cutting time, the optimum height, the optimum width, etc., etc. So there's a lot of work being done with that, particularly across the water. I've talked about the wild bird cover crops and kale. I also have 3 ponds, and I have woodlands, which I'll show you in a second here as well. Wild bird cover, the sowing and the managing of that. This is a little quad sower that I bought about 25 years ago, when actually a lot of contractors didn't actually have seeders that would put in the small seeds. And I've had that for quite some time. I'm not saying you should go out and buy one of those, whether they're even available, I don't know, but there are. And of course, most contractors now do have seeders capable of putting in small mixed seeds. But being able to do it yourself at the time it suits you is always very useful, as we all know. And this is a crop that was sown by that seeder a couple of weeks after put in. It's had good growing conditions, and you can see it does sow a good crop. So you can do these things on a slightly Heath Robinson species as well. That's out of interest when we start talking about woodlands. A map of Portlough in 1835, and the one thing that probably strikes you immediately is, besides a bit of, this is Castle Ward, and that's obviously mature forestry area, this is the Alderstown Road, is you can see how little timber and how little woodland actually was on the farm in those days. But of course, you mustn't forget in those days that hedgerow trees weren't really allowed to grow because they were used for firewood, and so things have moved on substantially. But just to capture that in your eye, and we'll show you then the map which we've got now, so you can see how much more it's been afforested. So this is the current map, which shows the planting, and the legend shows it well here. The yellow is the grant-aided plantings, in other words, new plantings. The green bits are woodland as per the old map. So this is the sort of mature old woodland. And what I've done with my plantings is I planted very unproductive parts of the farm, and I had, in this part of the world, we've got lots of rocks and we've got lots of what we call knowes, and I've tried to join them up into sensible blocks of woodland that are capable of producing timber and also creating warmth and shelter for wildlife as well. So, you know, that's a good example. That is the old existing woodland, and this is a new stand which was planted about 25 years ago. So you can see the complete difference from one map to the other, and the amount of planting we've done. And I suppose, from my point of view, I could be lucky in so much that it was a fairly clean sheet of paper when I took over the farm. And I also did quite a lot of planting before we took the farm back in hand. But a lot of it was done some time ago, which because this bit wasn't really let. So this would have been rough grazing in the old days, and we've now turned it into reasonably productive woodland. But the one thing it does do, it captures a lot of carbon. We'll talk about that later on. Ponds are a tremendous asset to any farm or any landscape, aesthetically from the look of ponds, but also the wildlife that ponds attract. And this is an old bit at the back of my farm. The farmyard's away with the left, and my father always used to say this bit was far too wet to plough. He would have ploughed every inch that he could, quite right in those days, because food production was the only thing that paid him. So it was too wet to plough, but not wet enough for a snipe. So it was sort of rushy, tussocky, quite typical bits that we all have in our farms. And that was in 2004, and that was just starting on making the pond that I'll show you now in a second. So this is another digging we did to make it a little bit bigger. I can't remember what year it was, about 10, 12 years ago, probably that. And this is what we've ended up with. And I have to say, we get a lot of pleasure out of this. We've sort of put some trees and a few ornamental trees, not many, in, and we've got a pathway around it. And it's great when you can walk around it with the grandchildren, or, you know, just on a summer's evening, go round, and we've put a few trout in there, and it's a great, I think, asset to the farm. One little word of warning is you just need a little bit careful about creating ponds and not to fall foul of any local laws or bylaws, or you should discuss with NIEA if you've got any doubts, but there are regulations covering that, so just be careful. It doesn't have to be hugely expensive is a great thing about it either. I mean, this was, I suppose, about a week with a digger over 2 different sittings really. And the dam, you can't see really, it's down at the far end. This is just a shock. It literally would add a trickle of water. In fact, it's dry at the moment. And it would add a trickle of water coming down that in the winter, no big rush, and this little dam. And what we did, this is a trick I learned from a fish farmer I met in Scotland, and this is a Waven pipe going in below the dam here, and it goes straight out into the pond area. And the height of your pipe here, it's on a 90-degree Waven pipe, and the height here dictates the height of your water. And the dam is not a very good photograph, but I think you get the gist of it. There's a slightly easier one that's not the same dam, it's a different dam, but you can see the pipe just in the bottom there. And if you see the far end, it's got the replica of that at the far end. So you can make water, hold back water relatively cheaply. I mean, both those dams have been in place now for, well, 12, 15 years with zero maintenance. This is a natural pond that we have, which has got a bit of open water, but a bit of reed mace and rushes. And it's quite a nice pond in so much it's got the most tremendous population of dragonflies. It just seems extraordinary. I don't know what it is, but the dragonflies seem to absolutely love it, and the lacewings, etc., etc. I'm not very good in my bugs, but there are lots of people who are, and they're always amazed at what's flying around it. This is another pond which we only flood in the winter time, and it attracts. We first started to flood it, in fact, to shoot some ducks. I don't shoot the ducks anymore. I haven't for the last 8, 9, 10 years. Just get a lot of pleasure watching them coming in off Strangford, and this is only flooded to about 5 or 6 inches, and it attracts different wildfowl, different ducks to the ones that come onto that pond or the other pond that you saw. And if you get a stormy night on Strangford, this can be literally have hundreds of ducks coming onto it. It's a great sight to just go and watch it. And there again, makes you feel, well, proud, I suppose, the fact that so many different wildfowl are using something that you've created that wasn't there before. A little bit about soil and soil health. This is a little infogram done by Farming for Nature, which I picked off the internet, and it just basically highlights the advantages and what you should do: reducing soil compaction disturbance, increase organic matter by adding compost, farm manure and crop residues, diversify crops and rotations, keep soil covered, and minimize synthetic inputs. And obviously with the cost issues, that's very pertinent at the moment. And I have to say, I'm not very good at rotations because I keep things simple, and the spring crops with lower inputs suits me at the moment. If I was a bigger, more professional farmer, of course, I would probably be having a rotation, etc., etc., etc. So that's just a sort of thought provoker for this. And what I've been doing, started last year, I've been experimenting a bit with multi-species cover crops. And as soon as, and there again, a slight drawback with bringing spring cereals in, they're a great habitat, but you don't have that long a growing season to get these green crops going. So as soon as you can get the combine out and get the straw off, you want to get this done. And Neil Patterson, as some of you will probably know, local big farmer, very kindly came and put his sumo through this and sowed this multi-species green cover crop for me, and he's done it again this year. This is actually last year, he's done it again this year. And the advantage of this, it does fix nitrogen with growing conditions from it. You get good growing. We definitely improve the soil structure, and that's the root action, which is all different. These are all chosen from different root actions. It improves moisture retention, worm count, which my land was not good, and it's much better now, and organic matter, because it grows up. I should have had another photograph showing what we did with it. And we literally blitzed it down, flailed it in one bit, and we sprayed it off in another. But we've learned a lot more, and hopefully next year or next spring we'll just be able to perhaps roll it down and not even flail it, and just direct drill it in straight away. So that's the plan. It does also prevent soil erosion. This is a very clean field, you can see it. and I noticed the season before we had quite heavy rain, and I just didn't. You can just see the tram lines there, but the tram lines over the hill to the right, when you got heavy rain, it was pushing soil down onto the headland rig, and then it was then finding its way out into Strangford Lough. And one really wet morning, I came down on the quad, and I was horrified to see that the whole of our bay was literally brown with this clay soil with runoff, and I didn't like that one little bit. So that's why one other reason I've done that anyway. And so far the jury's out on that. We had a reasonable crop off it this year. It wasn't quite as good as I hoped. We had that very dry spell, but it's certainly a whole lot better than it had been before. And there are some interesting numbers here. This is Fane Valley I got the seeds from, and they kindly did some soil testing at their behest to try and compare an adjacent field that didn't have any cover crop and this field which you've seen. And the one thing, I won't bore you with all this stuff because it's all far more complicated than I really understand. But the one interesting thing is that straight away, I think this was done in November, that from September to November, the nitrogen fixing was substantial. You can see there that 6394 potential recycling. It's all potential. This don't quite know whether I cut the nitrogen down on this field, whether that was a reason that my yield dropped. It didn't drop, it was up from before, but wasn't as good. It certainly looked better than it should be, but I'm absolutely convinced that was just purely and simply a climatic issue with the drought that we had. How are we doing for time, Nicola? Are we okay there? This is going into the bird counts now, really. This is, I suppose, the proof's in the pudding. Is that the way to put it? We've been very pleased. RSPB and also Wildlife have been doing bird counts and species counts for us over the years, and in fact DERA have used us as well for comparisons against non-EFS, non-ICMS farms as well. And the great thing I like about this little chart is that this is the time you want to have the birds in your farm. So this to me would prove that really different species at different farm at different times of the year, but this is the time of what we call the hungry gap, after the sort of wild bird cover crops are sort of nearly over their use. We've still got some habitats here that are attracting these birds, and probably more than our neighbours have as well. The top one, a lot of people know that I have barn owls here. Very lucky to have them. I love having them around the place. But they were here, but they just weren't sighted. These surveys are done at dawn, and Mr. and Mrs. Barn Owl are tucked up in their boxes early in the morning. So I see barn owls regularly around the place, and it's just lovely to see them. And a particular pride point this chart is the 18 yellow hammers. That's a good number to have, and I'm delighted to have them. This is a little chart that Dara asked me to put into this presentation. I suppose it's not a sort of a deep dive into my farm financials. It's a tracker that I've kept over the years just to compare yields, compare moisture, compare the price I got for my grain, the yields, the cost of fertilizer sprays, and to compare the total input costs, and to do a straight calculation, input per acre. Just a few little notes about the type of year it was, as the climate, and then these are gross profit figures. So this is not a calculation of that, but these numbers are all in that. So this is gross profit, really, gross margin, but it's pretty well everything. I mean, all my contractor charges are in that, my diesel and everything's in that. The only thing's not probably depreciation and bank charges and things like that. And it shows, I mean, you guys are probably watching, probably made a lot more money, or probably sniggering yourselves, God, I wouldn't bother getting out of bed for all that. But it just shows when you do actually put some gross margin together with the BPS and the EFS income, and, this forestry income has dropped because I haven't planted any new trees but the last 10 years. But you can do these calculations yourself, and you can very easily see you can start to build up what I would call a better financial picture for farming when you put all the different constituents together. And my BPS, in case any of you are sort of wondering, we just had the minimum payments at the start, but we weren't active farmers when we first started. And of course the modulation, if we'd been allowed to go the extra 2 years, it should have been done, then that figure would have been £11,000-12,000 by now. But fortunately, I had nothing to do with that decision. So the outcomes. Northern Ireland Wildlife Farm of the Year, and not boasting, this is the things that have happened, the work that I've done. Purdy Award, which is good to get. The Royal Surrey, I was very pleased about this Forestry Award, which I was dissuaded to enter. I don't normally enter things, but I was asked to enter it because I felt it was a good entry, and we were decided to be joined first on the last bit of planting that I did. And just on woodland, if anyone has a particular interest in woodland and wants to come and have a look around my woods, please do give me a shout. I'm very happy to show people around the woodlands, and some forestry people have also said if people wanted to come and look at it, they'd be very happy to come and join in and give some advice. We have 63 different bird species at the last count, and that doesn't include lots of species of duck. It is farmland birds and plus some others. We had 2 broods of barn owls 2020. We had 1 brood last year, and we had 1 brood this year. And lovely to say that we had 4 of our owlets fledged, and I still see them around. But it's lovely when, they're a great indicator or barometer of the biodiversity, because what do they eat? They eat rodents, mice, young rats. We don't want lots of young rats running around the place, but they wouldn't be here unless, the mice and the rats are eating the waste grain. And so they're doing a job as well on vermin control. Just talking about that, I'm not going to label the subject. Just most farmers very often do have to use rodenticides of some kind, and it's a little bit of a hot potato of mine, because we found the odd barn owl dead here now. They could be just simply they were going to die anyway. They couldn't feed properly, whatever reason, or there might have been some other problem. But there are a couple of products which you really must not use around the farm. In fact, they're not licensed to be used around the farmyard. One is called Storm and one is called Jaguar, and they're very, very toxic indeed to owls and any raptor. So please, if you're sold those, just refuse them, because they're only licensed for industrial closed areas. Future plans. Plan and manage removal of ash dieback. That's a big issue for most farmers in Northern Ireland. Just being talked about now, I suppose, really. But, there's a lot of ash in Northern Ireland. A lot of them are just overgrown hedgerow trees that have grown into trees. The big issue from biodiversity is they are a great host for ivy, and no ash trees, the ivy on the trees will go, and they will leave, quite literally a hole in the countryside. And there's a lot, we need to sort of think about this ash dieback a bit more seriously than we are. I think we'll find as time goes on, if we have dead ash trees along a public road or a public footpath through our land or anything like that, we as landowners are going to be liable. And just one little word of warning is the longer that the ash trees have ash dieback, and you can see it with the branches that are dying at the tips of the trees, that the inside of the tree will be considerably deader than you think it is, and they get jolly dangerous. So you just have to be a little bit careful, and we need a bit more advice about how to handle those, I think, anyway. I'm going to plan expansion of conservation cropping arable techniques, as we saw with the sumo and the green crop. I'm going to work my carbon benchmarking, and I'm going to try to further reduce my CO2, and I'll show you a few numbers on that now in a second. And I want to try and sell some more Christmas trees. So when it comes to Christmas, need a Christmas tree, give me a shout. Just on carbon benchmarking, AgriCalc is the one that DERA use, and some of you might already had your AgriCalc calculation done. I have, but I also did my own through an organization called Farm Carbon Toolkit. And this is something you can do yourself. You don't need someone else to do it for you. And actually doing it yourself in Farm Carbon Toolkit, you do actually learn a lot about what's costing you and what's not. And we actually put a number into on a computer program, and it suddenly shows you in the bottom right hand corner the effect that just that one action has on your carbon footprint. It's actually very revealing. AgriCalc is very good, don't get me wrong, but Farm Carbon Toolkit is, if you want to learn more about carbon, I would definitely recommend you did that one as well, which is what I've done. And I've actually in the slides, I've used the Farm Carbon Toolkit ones because they're easier to understand in a presentation like this, but they're both virtually the same as you'd expect. Although the AgriCalc one doesn't count hedgerows for some reason, which is extraordinary to me. But anyway, so you can see what happens in these calculations. It basically counts the emissions from various things. I don't have any livestock, but I owned up to rearing and releasing some pheasants, so they were counted as ducks in a sort of in an agricultural way. So this is the carbon footprint of my pheasants. So I'm being totally fair, and it's not. I wasn't the point of making. I'm not hiding anything. I don't think anyway. So I didn't try to. And then on the counterbalance side, of course, you can see, you know, what a great asset woodland can be in capturing carbon, and of course the EFS habitats that you have as well. Hedgerows, I don't have that many traditional hedgerows, and all the other bits of wetland, everything else. And of course, how these are all measured, we know that's an ongoing conversation, and that'll become much clearer as we go on through and as we get used to all this stuff. So this is obviously a graphic. It shows how it all comes together. This is the negative side, and this is the positive side. And you can see we sequester very nearly 30 tons of CO2 per year. And I think we can do better by changing some of our farming practices. And in case you're wondering, because I don't have my own combine, I don't have my own plough, and I don't have my own sower, but all the contractors' carbon emissions are taken into this calculation as well. So it's what I do plus what he does. So I think, having done it, I think it's a very fair system, as agriculture does as well. So it's up to you going forward what you want. But I would definitely use agriculture. That's a dearer one. But also, if you really want to understand what difference it can make to your own farm, I would have a go at the Farm Carbon Toolkit one. It's very simple to put in, and the two, you know, can run in parallel. That just shows you, if that was red, of course, then I'd be very worried. But the fact is, in the balance, and hopefully over time, we'll start to be rewarded for capturing carbon or emitting. Not saying fine, but you know what I mean. So that was just a little bit of a sidetrack on carbon, but we all know it's a really important part of farming now. And I think if anyone thinks that the conversation on carbon capture is going away, I can tell you it's not going away one iota. It'll become even more important as we move on towards 2030. And I think the time to start, there's no better time to start now. We all have areas which we could plant trees in. I would think most farms do. There are lots of specialist companies doing it. The payments, I don't have to my fingertips at the moment, but when I looked at them the last time for someone else who asked my advice, they're a whole lot better than I had in my day when I was planting trees, and I would seriously consider it. I think if you get on with it now, the trees will grow relatively quickly, and you'll be capturing, as the trees get older, more and more carbon. So that's really my little tour, Nicola, if that's okay with you. Can I sort of hand you back?
That's great. Thank you very much, David.
Share the questions, and I see what I can do to help, or others can perhaps help as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. So just to remind everyone, if you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A icon down in the bottom right hand of your screen. So yeah, Dave has demonstrated some of the different options that are available through EFS, and he's shown how he's able to use the schemes and other schemes to improve the habitats on his farm. And then we can see in the outcomes of the bird counts and how lovely his farm is. Like, it's a real great spot, especially when the sun is shining. So we have a few questions in here. So Rosemary, is it possible for a farm that does not have current payments under basic payment scheme to access EFS?
Yes, if you have a category 1 or 2 business, so you may not be claiming BPS, but you may still be eligible. Yeah, you can go into your local office or phone that contact number on the screen to get more information, and they'll be able to tell you, check your actual fields and whatever to tell you for sure if you can apply. That's really the best thing to do at the moment with the closing date coming up on Friday. Best to go ahead and either email into us at that email address, or even better, go into the local office.
Great, thank you.
Could I just chip in there without sort of muddying the water at all? I did read in the current consultation paper that's come out from DERA that when we get a replacement of the EFS, I think it's highly likely that you won't have to be an active farmer to be able to participate in the new scheme. I don't want to muddy the water, but if you can't claim now, I think there is a chance to be able to claim in the future, which is what you could do under the old NICMS, I understand it. But that obviously is all to be clarified.
Yeah, I think in the future it may be an option. The main difficulty that somebody might have is you can't have dual claims within EFS. If you have your land rented out, you really have to take control of it again. You can't have somebody else claiming BPS at the same time as you maybe put it into an EFS scheme. You just have to have management control over that land for the 5 years. The future scheme, I'm not sure if it'll be organised in the same way or not, but yeah, it's a good point to make, David, that there may be further opportunity in the years to come.
Great. David, we've one here for you. So just a comment from Vincent. So great to hear you speak so passionately about farming with nature. You might have missed it at the start, just looking your wisdom on keeping weed numbers down, especially creeping thistle, ragwort, fat hen, etc. Have you trailed steel seed beds? If yes, tell us more.
Okay, Vincent, thanks for asking that. Yeah, it's a very pertinent question. Probably didn't cover it well enough. I do use the stale seedbed technique on all my wild bird cover crop plots. I always do and always have done. And for those of you, I'm sure most of you know exactly, but we plow it, and then I would, at the same time, obviously I'm plowing the whole farm for spring cereals, and then when I'm sowing the spring barley, I would normally, in the areas I'm going to put in wild bird cover, I'll power harrow them to tickle it up and level it up. And you're not putting your wild bird cover if it's a sort of kale based one, or you've got a little bit of time to get the weeds to chit up again, because you're not looking for crop yield out of these areas. You're looking for a crop to grow. So it normally, depending on the growing conditions, you get a little bit of heat, a bit of moisture, you can get a good flush of weeds in a relatively short space of time. You can just burn them off and then direct drill into that seed bed. And I find it works very, very well indeed, I have to say. I suppose in the cultivated arable margins, we're doing something similar, but using the plough. We're not actually spraying it off as such. But of course you can, before you plough it, you can spray off the ground, then plough it, and then just cultivate it and leave it. But you can't use herbicide or fertilizer of any kind on the cultivated arable margins. But it's a good point. Thistles and managing weeds are a trial for environmental farmers, full stop. They're a challenge. But the other thing that I've learned is by moving the plots around the farm, it very quickly gets it under control. But one of the downsides of the old kale crops was that, as you know, when kale throws seed in the second year, it can be very persistent. But there again, all I've done with that is, if I've been using pre-emergent spray on my cereal fields, I've sort of, when I'm putting fertilizer on and say whatever you're doing as well after that, you're in the crop and you see some areas you're getting a little bit of regrowth of kale, knock it on the head with something like Max, and it actually leaves it very clean indeed. So a little bit of cost in the years after to stop the weeds getting, what's the right word, pernicious, I think the right word, but it is manageable, and the stale seedbed technique definitely works in the right situation with the right growing conditions.
Great, thank you, David. Let's see, Rosemary, do we know, or will there be a tranche 7 next year?
We don't anticipate there'll be a tranche 7 wider. There will be a tranche 7 for higher land. So at the moment, we don't envisage a tranche 7 for wider.
Great. Another one, Rosemary. When will the organic support become an add-on to EFS scheme? So it may have been talked about before, so that an existing EFS participant could bolt on an organic option.
It's organic is already part of EFS, wider and higher. So it's already there, available now if you want to apply for it. There is the conversion, so that's funding you right from the start. But if you're already converted, there's also a management aspect of funding there. So you can get the information on that, as I said, on the DARE website. If you just search for EFS, it's called a standalone, but it's actually through EFS wider. You go through that application system and you can access the organic funding through there.
Could I just sort of step out of order and just actually ask a question? I had a call from someone today, and some of you on the call might be able to advise. My wild bird cover seeds that I've used here over the last 2 or 3 years, because they haven't been EFS funded, just put them myself, they've been leftovers of previous plantings, which have done fine. So I haven't actually bought any wild bird cover seed recently, and I know with the protocol getting seed across the water is very difficult. And does anyone have any recommended seed providers here that do the DARE EFS prescription? If anyone does, they could perhaps advise me or answer the question, and the person who I think is on this call will be grateful.
I know, David, that we have put it in at Greenmount, so I'll find out. I couldn't find it there. I was looking, but where we got it from, but it was somewhere down south last year, so I'll find out where it was.
Yeah, there's a man in County Cork I know does it, and I think John, somebody can't remember his surname. But I think Fane Valley, to be fair, Fane Valley do also do some as well. So we'll try and find out, Chris, and come back to you as soon as we can. All right.
Vincent said here, designed by nature, possibly. So,
Okay.
no, we can have a look into that.
Thanks, Vincent.
Yes, Vincent as well. So if you're already in EFS, I don't think you can bolt on organic. So if I'm right, Rosemary, no, once you have your EFS agreement, that is you until.
Yeah, that's you locked in for 5 years. Sorry, maybe I misunderstood the earlier question. No, you can't bolt it on. No, you have to apply at the time that you're applying for wider.
Okay, I see this, Ross, Scotland County kind of a manner. I mean, I've only farmed in County Down, so some of the things I might be talking about as regards stale seed beds and cultivated arable margins and that sort of thing might be not something that's practical to do in an area of Northern Ireland that's not an arable growing area. So just to sort of point that out, you need to be honestly decide yourself what's right for you in your area.
Yeah, we have no more questions at the minute. I suppose, yeah, the wildflower is only under arable coding, so it's only an arable option, and then the winter feed crop can be for any farmers who are not specifically arable. Isn't that correct, Rosemary?
That's right, yeah. That's right.
So if we've no other questions, I will draw us to a close. Have David or Rosemary any final comments?
I'd just like to thank everybody for taking the time to come in on the conference call. As I say, if there's anything particular you want to ask me about or come and see regards forestry or anything else really, I'm normally here. Just give me a ring or whatever, and I'm glad. I'm not an advisor and I don't give advice, but I enjoy chatting about these things. Put it like that.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Okay, well, I just to finish by saying, if you do have any other questions or you feel that you haven't got to the bottom of your issue today, just punt an email into us there at efs@dara-ni.gov.uk, and we'll certainly come back to you as soon as we can.
Great. Yes, so really taken from David, make the most of the scheme. Have a think about what would work for you and your farm, and really, I suppose, as David said, there's something in the scheme for everyone and each farm for some area on your farm. And I suppose it's having a think about what you can do in your first year of the agreement. So all the work has to be done in year one. So don't overload yourself with piling on a lot of different options and work that you might not get completed in the year one. So just have a good think about what you would like to do in the scheme, and if you can get it all done, and have a read of the information sheet before you apply, just so you know what you are signing up for. And again, if you require any assistance, please phone your local Deer Direct office and make an appointment and go in and see them, and they should be able to help you. So thank you to David and Rosemary for your contributions to this webinar this evening, and to all you folk for coming along and for your questions. Hope you found some useful information and guidance, and that you get on well with the scheme if you take it up. Thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.